Brit helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Kavanaugh, thanks so much for joining us. Well, catch basins have never been much of a public issue, nor has there been much public demand for vacuum trucks. Well, this week, both were in the news with questions about why there are not more trucks to unclog more basins. Freer Flowing is the Sewerage and Water Board's collections department, which the council investigated this week for overbilling. We'll look at the latest in politics, as well as Jefferson Parish President Mike Yenny, a year after the sexting scandal revelation. And we'll hear from the reporter who broke the story about John Besh and how his beat suddenly changed from restaurant critic to investigative reporting. All of this, plus an update on the culinary industry, are on the plate with tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. Brett Anderson, restaurant critic, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. And Katie Moore, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And we go on over to David first, and let's sort of get the latest on what's going on with the mayor's race. There was the credit card issue with candidate Cantrell, but then now there's more about all of the council members and credit cards.
Right. Well, when that whole thing first started a few weeks ago with revelations about Cantrell paying back almost $9,000 in charges, we put in a public records request, as did other media, to get the entire council's credit card usage. And I have to say, having investigated credit card usage from Mayor Ray Nagin and other officials, I wished I had asked for the credit card usage before. And so now we saw we needed to get this information and put it into context. And what we found is that Cantrell did spend the most. She spent over $100,000 in her 4.5 years with the credit card. But it wasn't that far out of line with others. Say Jason Williams, the councilman at large, also didn't spend that much, but he had been there a shorter period of time. So they averaged about $23,000 per year in expenses. They took the most trips as well, over 30 trips each with them and their staffs going, sometimes overseas. And, you know, Jason Williams said that he went to China to try to woo investment in New Orleans. And so there was, you know, when you look at it also with the denominator is important. You know, they have a budget of $35,000 a year. It's now been reduced to 30, and all of them were under budget. So it started to kind of put things into perspective as it relates to how Cantrell has used the credit card. It's not that far out of line in the types of things she was buying, although she did spend it more.
And so we're getting close to the final day, to the day of voting and decision.
Yeah.
How is all of this impacting the race? Can we tell?
I think it's hard to tell in terms of not having specific poll numbers, but clearly the lead that polls showed that Cantrell had prior to this news coming out may be affected. And anecdotally, I've heard people saying that the credit card issue has made them have second thoughts. People who really, really like Cantrell and feel like she works really hard for her district. She lifted herself up by her bootstraps. She did a lot for the Broadmoor community as a leader there after Katrina. And they feel like that energy is terrific for the next mayor. And were really gung-ho about it. Then they heard about the credit card spending and the questions about a few expenses here and there that maybe weren't responsible or weren't handled the best way, and where she said she admitted making mistakes.
I think as we go into the last week, there's no public issue which is really distinguishing one candidate from the other. They all say pretty much the same thing. They all read the same polls. They've all gravitated to the same central ground. So what's going to make a difference is going to be those kind of issues, is the personal attacks, to what extent people buy those charges, to what extent it affects them. But probably that one issue will probably be the one that makes the most difference.
Well, the nastiness level really ratcheted up when the DA, Leon Canizaro's office, disclosed that they had gotten a criminal complaint and passed it along to the Attorney General's office. That, was seen as a little bit of a political attack because he had openly endorsed Desiree Charbonnet and actually employs her brother in that office. So then it just ratcheted everything up, and then there was a complaint against Charbonnet, and so it's just really kind of changed the tenor of the election.
But as you said, now that we've looked at the other council members and expenditures, it really isn't out of line necessarily, certainly within budget, all of them for that matter.
The distinction, but it was certainly within budget, which is really key to point out. Although there is some variation. I mean, you look at council members Head, Guidry, and Brossette, they spent way less than the others.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks a lot, David. Over to Katie right now, and certainly an issue that has been really the focus of one of the major focuses of this mayor's race is Sewerage and Water Board and its functions, and also catch basins, clogged catch basins, and that's what you looked at this week.
I did.
Boy, some of the stuff that's found in those basins.
It's really pretty gross.
Yes,
I mean, that's the nicest way I can put it. But we've really been looking into all aspects of the drainage system and largely the Sewerage and Water Board after those floods this summer. And so our entire investigative team, David, Mike Pearlstein, and I, and a team of researchers have been digging into the Sewerage and Water Board and trying to see what led up to those floods in July and August, and what the biggest problems are with the agency. Now, catch basins are DPW's responsibility, the city's Department of Public Works, and there are 68,000 of them in the city. And so one of the things that was in my story this week was an analysis of the city's 311 data and looking at how many or how few of them have actually been cleaned, and the fact that they've received 13,000 reports from people about clogged or broken catch basins since 2012, and less than half of those have actually been resolved. So that's a pretty significant number, and that's only people who actually call in. So the big question is, and that the city's still trying to figure out right now, is how many of them are actually clogged?
Yeah, and I mean, that's such an important issue. Of course, and whenever we have a storm coming up or heavy rain, they always urge everybody to go out there and clean up your catch basins. But why isn't the city doing it?
Exactly. That's a great question. And, even in saying that, we hear go clean your catch basins, which does help. Getting that debris out could possibly unclog something that's clogged in that pipe. But, if this storm and this situation has taught us anything, it's that those catch basins are only part of the problem, and that you really need those big vacuum trucks to get in there, flush out the pipes that connect the catch basin to the main drainage system, and clean out all the gunk that's around there.
And there's a problem with not enough trucks? Is that
Yeah, the city, when this whole thing first came out, we learned that the city only had 2 working vacuum trucks that were trying to address these catch basins, these 68,000 catch basins. I mean, you do the math on that, and it's like there's no way that is even going to make an impact.
Right.
And then since then, what we had in my report was that the Sewerage and Water Board has a fleet of vacuum trucks as well, but the two don't work together. And even when the Sewerage and Water Board gets even more trucks that they just ordered in next year, they'll have a fleet of 19 trucks that they use just for sewage. So they clean the sewage lines. Companies have said that the trucks can be used for both. They can be used for sewage and drainage. Yet the mayor's office has said that they do not have any plans to try and utilize any of those trucks.
But once they get the trucks, do they have the staff? We already know there's a shortage of staff there.
There's a shortage of staff at the Sewerage and Water Board, and that's a great question. That's one that I was not able to get an answer to from the Sewerage and Water Board. The interim management team has been really trying to, figure that out. But we don't know if it's the trucks or if it's the workers or what.
So what's the status of all these catch basins? I mean, people need to go out there with shovels still and do it themselves?
Well, so the city doesn't encourage people to go out there and open up the catch basin. Apparently that weighs something like 250 pounds or something. Yeah, so they don't recommend you actually going in there and doing it, but they do still say go clean the front of those catch basins, because that may be just enough to unclog something that's further down the line.
I thought it was amazing how the system, it's one drainage system, but you have 2 entities that are in control of it, and you found those trucks that were just sitting there.
Just sitting there, yeah. And now the Sewerage and Water Board has said that those trucks, that only 5 of them were working, and that's not enough to lend the city any during this whole event. But then Again, they're about to have 19 trucks, and the city's about to have 5 when they purchase a new truck. 1.
It would seem like the city could use some help with it.
The city could use some help, and that you could work something out and figure out how to work together. But it's this, a somewhat, in my mind, ridiculous arrangement where we have one drainage system that's controlled by 2 different entities, and they almost seem to refuse to cross.
Okay, I know you guys have a special coming up, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more. It's coming up Wednesday night, more about this whole drainage issue. Right now, though, over to Brett. And Brett is a restaurant critic, a wonderful, highly regarded restaurant critic. But you turned a story that really made a big splash, not just here, but all over. This was regarding the John Besh Restaurant Group and John Besh. So you turned into an investigative reporter. So how did you make that switch? What happened? How did you uncover this?
Well, the job that I've been in this job for 17 years. There has always been an element of news and feature reporting that I've been required to do. So last February, when I got a tip from someone that a woman in the corporate office of the John Besh Restaurant Group had quit her job, and he suggested I might want to look into it. That in itself was not totally out of the ordinary. And after I spoke with her, I had realized she had emailed in her resignation, where in that email she detailed the reasons why she quit, which was basically she said that there was a culture of sexual harassment that she could no longer tolerate. I found out soon thereafter that 2 other people quit the same office for similar reasons on the exact same week that she did. And, I felt a responsibility and frankly just a natural curiosity to find out if what they were saying had any truth to it. And so I just started making some phone calls, and that led me down this path. A few months into it, it might have, if it was a different situation, I might have passed the assignment off. But the nature of reporting on sexual harassment, the sort of relationship between the reporter and the sources is such that it wouldn't have been sensitive of me to all of a sudden say you're going to talk to someone else.
So walk us through it a bit. You say within a few months. Actually, how long did this investigation take?
The first calls were made last February. I think a couple days after the Coup de Vue parade. That's when I remember getting this tip. And it wasn't like I worked on it absolutely full time. I was writing restaurant criticism in that time, and I was doing other parts of my job. It was in the summer that I would say that it kind of became a little bit all-consuming, and that was at the point where we brought in Manuel Torres, who was our investigations editor, and he really helped me a lot in shaping the story and talking me through the sort of legal ramifications of it, and he deserves a tremendous amount of credit.
Well, you are a restaurant critic, and so you go to a lot of restaurants in town.
I do.
When you were hearing what you were hearing from the people who did come forward, was this surprising you at all?
Yes and no. The not surprising part is that, in the last 15 years, I would say, as restaurants have produced their own celebrities in ways that we haven't seen quite before, there has been a kind of glamorization of the coarseness of restaurant culture behind the scenes. That is something that you don't even need to be in the industry to be aware of, the fact that there's a certain machismo associated with that industry. And so some of the language that I was listening, hearing people complain about, that kind of thing, that wasn't necessarily stuff that shocked me to the point of disbelief. And restaurants are, I've been eating in restaurants for, 10 days a week for most of my adult life. And they do often tend to be sort of sexualized environments, and a lot of my sources would talk to me about that. That is something I could observe as a customer, flirtations and things like that. Sometimes people maybe being overserved and being inappropriate, and many of my sources pointed out that kind of behavior, when it's not sort of nipped in the bud between customers and staffers, can create a slippery slope in terms of what's acceptable.
So folks have to be careful. So when these folks were talking to you, your sources, you immediately you felt they're telling me something that's real here?
You know, I really tried to be as impartial as I could. My job, I felt, was to be open to what everyone was telling me to be the truth, unless I had reason to not believe them. And then at the end of the day, when we put the story together, put together those facts that met the highest standard of journalistic integrity and verification.
The difficulty of doing a story like this can't be understated, and I think Brett, you know, he and I talked briefly after he did the story because I was just so impressed, because I've done stories about sexual allegations before, Katie has too. It's very, very difficult, and especially when you get into private citizens versus public officials, which we tend to deal with, and that is a very difficult, you know, obstacle to cross legally and all this stuff. And Brett just stuck with it and did a great job. And it's an emotional thing for the reporter to deal with.
And so do you think that this is really going to have an impact on the culture?
I think that it's still really new. You know what I mean? The story's like 3 weeks old, and thank you, David, by the way. So I think it's a little early to tell, you know, whether or not this one story is going to have an impact on the culture. I do believe that it has helped start a conversation. I mean, I think that is sort of undoubted. You can't doubt it. Sorry, I'm not on TV a lot. And that has to, I think, be to some benefit, but I do think that, I mean, to David's point, there has been a lot of talk in social media in particular about how journalists need to step up to tell these stories because there's thinking that there's a lot of them out there. And I really think it's the responsibility of the restaurant industry. I mean, it is the responsibility of journalists, but as to David's point, it's hard to get these things into the news.
Right.
And
I think that's a point well taken. E, you wanted a quick
What do
comment?
you hear from your colleagues? I mean, certainly this can't be unique to New Orleans, or other people who cover restaurant journalists looking into this in other communities, or?
I mean, it's my understanding that they are. I mean, you know, the cohort of food journalists is actually a pretty small one across the country, and I have spoken with many people who say that they are looking into stories like this in their community. But and I, you know, and if they find stories that they can verify and bring to the public's attention, I think that that's great. But I do still think that the people who really have the power to change this are the people who run the restaurants, and if they do that, then it wouldn't be so necessary to expose them, right?
Well, really important story.
Thank you.
Great reporting, and also to Manuel Torres, as you pointed out as well. Okay, David, over to you. And we have a little bit less time now since we've been talking about restaurants, but you did do an interview with Jefferson Parish President Mike Kinney.
Well, speaking of issues that regard sexual allegations, and I have interviewed him from time to time, but he's never been willing to address the questions that I have about the sexting with the 17-year-old boy in 2015. And it had been about a year, and he had the State of the Parish address, so I went because last year at this time he didn't give the State of the Parish address at the Chamber of Commerce. So I went and I asked...
He wasn't invited.
Right, exactly. He was not asked to do it. He had his COO do it instead. And when he did do a State of the Parish address in January, it was taped. So I went to see what would happen, and he gave the address, and it looks like he's moved on, but I had questions that I wanted to ask him about his spending as it related to some major furniture upgrades and such in his office. And the thing that I focused on was, you know, in his inner office, he made it look like George W. Bush's Oval Office, and he had a Resolute desk like the presidents have had over the years. But he says that he spent only his own money on that, and the documents that were finally turned over to the Jefferson Parish Council seem to largely bear that out. But I had questions about $10,000 spent by the fire department to pay for big screen TVs and some other questionable expenses. And he answered all the questions and stood by the spending.
What about re-election?
Well,
Did you talk to him
I
about that?
asked him if he would be running again because he was actually having a $500 a head fundraiser that same day. And he acknowledged having the fundraiser, but said that he hasn't decided yet whether it will be used for another run.
David, I think what was interesting in his speech is that he also took part of it to give some tips to New Orleans in terms of.
He was asked by the moderator. I think some of the stuff looked like it was prepared ahead of time because as soon as he'd be asked a question, he'd say, put up that slide, or they'd put up a slide to back up what he was saying. But he actually kind of took some shots a little bit without saying the name of Latoya Cantrell, talking about the next mayor needs to get rid of the credit cards like he's done. And he also bragged about their drainage, their well-performing drainage system compared to New Orleans. So, he had some comments directed at New Orleans for sure.
He feels confident about the work he is doing as president?
His state of the parish was essentially, we're doing a great job. We've renewed millages, which some people would say is not necessarily a good thing if they felt like they didn't want to keep paying those taxes. But he took it as a big success.
The most recent was a
That's
transportation
nothing-
renewal.
That's
Right,
nothing.
and drainage.
There's nothing you can come back from come the next election time. I predict he will run next time.
We'll see. I mean, I wanted people to understand, though, that he's not stopped in terms of his campaign and in terms of, contending that he's doing good work.
And what
right.
will happen with time? He's still got a number of
Right.
years in office.
2 more years
years.
before there would even be an election.
But there will always be people reminding the public about that issue.
True.
I mean, look
David
at David
Hammer.
Vitter. Yeah, I mean,
Hammer.
okay, there'll be people
Only when
reminding him
necessary.
something.
And there will also be always Yenny supporters, too,
Yeah.
and those who agree with him saying he's doing a good job. So time will tell. Okay,
And
over
Vitter
to
did
Katie
win
right
an
now.
election.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Vitter did win an election after.
That's quite
good
true.
point.
That is quite true. Okay, Katie.
Yes.
Billing in
Billing.
Sewage and Water Board. Some people are like, what?
It's
I
a
owe
doozy.
this?
Let
Yeah.
me tell you. So we created this Facebook group called Down the Drain, which if anybody out there is watching and wants to join, we would love it, to create a conversation about drainage when we started working on this project. And one of the biggest things that we keep hearing about are problems with billing and the issues that the Sewage and Water Board has had, in recent months with double billing people, 5,000 customers, and now there are some concerns that that's happening again. Now, Sewage and Water Board recently got this new computer system that was supposed to fix all of these problems that people have with their meters not being read, and their staffing shortage makes it impossible for them to do that every meter every month. People see these problems with their bills, and then they've had very little recourse. And I think that is one of the things that is, not to use a bad water pun, but is at a boiling point right now, because there's very little leadership that's permanent at the top levels of the Sewage and Water Board. And the question will be in the next couple of weeks and the next few months as we approach a new mayor, who's going to take that role? And I think nobody can really answer those billing questions right now, and it's adding to the frustration.
The management team leaves on the 30th.
Yes.
So then what happens?
Then apparently they're going to have to appoint another interim person to be the head of this. They have an interim superintendent right now, but they don't have an interim executive director other than this management team. So they're going to have to appoint somebody in the interim. And then my guess is that they would end up issuing some sort of national search and going through a national search agency.
So for those folks who have these enormous bills, what recourse do they have at this point? Are they being given some leeway?
Yeah, I mean, no, they are still facing penalties if they don't pay the bill. That's one of the really difficult things about the situation is that even if you get a $2,500 bill and you're only supposed to be getting one that's $80, they expect you to pay it and then work out what the resolution will be down the line. And for a lot of people, that's just impossible.
And we're hearing from people who are going in multiple times, and it's been a year, and they can't get it. And now they're being told, oh, the person who ran that is gone now because
gotta
you've
be
got
so
a loss
frustrating.
of leadership on the financial side. So it's an excuse that's not a very good one.
Okay, all right. Well, that's a continuing story, I know. Over to Brett, and we have just a couple of minutes for you to assess the state of the restaurant industry in New Orleans in terms of the restaurants out there.
As it happens, our fall dining guide is coming out in the newspaper on Sunday, and so I have been, every fall I pick the 10 best restaurants in New Orleans and the 5 best new restaurants of the year. And the restaurant of the year, the reason I bring all that up is while I was working on this best story, I was doing some of my most active dining out in anticipation of this story. And Errol and I were talking earlier about there being a bit of a fever pitch in the restaurant community about it being harder than ever out there, about it being, there's being so many restaurants and there's so many closures. I can't say that in the 20 years I've been writing about restaurants, there has never been a time where you weren't able to find a lot of people who are complaining about how hard it is to run a restaurant. It's famously difficult business. I can say that in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've heard more complaints about struggles than I have at any other time. Whether or not that proves that we have reached this point where there's too many restaurants for the city to support, which is something that people theorize, I don't really know yet. But it is something that I think is interesting and taking note of.
So what kind of, what are you noting in terms of trends or changes that we're seeing now and what people are wanting to go out to eat?
Well, I think we're seeing it like a continuing downscaling of what I would call event dining, meaning that there are restaurants that are being opened by chefs of a level of training who in previous generations would almost feel it was their duty to open their first restaurant and have it be a white tablecloth chandelier place, who are opening sandwich shops and who are opening southeastern Asian street food places, and these kinds of things. And that's a continuation of a trend that's been going on for kind of a long time, and that I can, in New Orleans, you can see even just with the progression, say, of someone like Donald Link opening Koshan now 12 years ago, which is very much of a country place. And so that's a trend that I still see happening, that, the downscaling of chef restaurants.
Okay, 20 seconds.
The other thing about restaurants is it's one business where if you go into it and you're successful, you can get almost instant recognition, almost instant celebrity, and it doesn't matter what you are, or, ethnicity is to your advantage in this business, where in other businesses it isn't. And so it's a good entry. It's a tough job. It's a tough job. But if you're an accountant or a lawyer, it may take you years and years. To get recognition. Restaurant, you open the door and people are talking about you the next week.
Well, let me just wrap this up, though. New Orleans cuisine, healthy and alive?
Yes, I will say that it's healthy and alive.
That's a good thing.
That's a safe thing to say.
We sure enjoy it. Okay, it's time to look ahead. Errol.
Last year, the city revived the old Sugar Bowl tennis tournament, and it's this weekend at City Park. These are the top 12 to 18-year-olds in the South who are playing. It's free, no admission. It's really good tennis to just go and watch and to support.
Okay, great. David?
Wednesday, November 15th. Watch Down the Drain on WWL-TV. We've been working on it for almost 3 months now, nonstop. So it's an hour-long special, and Katie and Mike and I will be giving you the whole story of what went wrong.
6 to 7.
Yes.
So no 6 o'clock news. It's just a special program.
Exactly.
Wednesday, November 15th. Brett?
This coming Monday at Coquette Restaurant on Magazine Street, one of my top 10 restaurants in New Orleans, is holding a benefit in partnership with Pablo Johnson, who is a friend of mine and makes great red beans. They're doing a benefit for victims of Harvey and the Puerto Rico.
Very good. Okay, thanks. Katie?
This coming up Monday at 10, I have a co-piece to our Down the Drain special. I have an exclusive interview with a pump station worker who was working the night of August 5th, and it's a little taste of what's to come in our Down the Drain special.
We'll be looking for it. And then also this Wednesday here on WYS at 7 p.m. after their special, it is the premiere of Peggy Scott Laborde's latest documentary, and this one, New Orleans, the first 300 years. You don't want to miss it because it's really, really special. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.